September of 1944, Western France near the Lire River. Imagine a world cloaked in mist, where rivers cut off any escape and the quiet is broken only by the distant rumble of engines and the ominous drone of aircraft overhead. In this unforgiving landscape, 20,000 German soldiers stand trapped. Their uniforms are streaked with mud, their faces pale, their hearts pounding with fear. They are hundreds of miles from safety, cut off from supply lines, and facing the unstoppable advance of George Patton's Third Army. At the center of this impossible situation is one man, General Botho Henning Elster. He's a professional soldier, a man of discipline and principle, but now he faces a choice that could mean life or death for thousands under his command. Fight against overwhelming odds, disperse into the countryside, and risk annihilation by American forces and French partisans, or surrender and hope for mercy. Every option carries horrifying consequences. And yet, in the fog of war, one decision will alter not just the fate of his troops, but the course of the campaign across France. Before we go any further, make sure you like this video and subscribe to WWII Silent Valor. We uncover the untold strategic decisions of World War II, and this story will hold your attention for every minute. Trust me, you won't want to skip a single moment. By mid-September, the situation for German forces in Western France had become catastrophic. Following the Allied breakout from Normandy in August, Patton's Third Army had raced eastward at a speed that shocked even his own commanders. German defensive lines collapsed under the relentless push of mechanized American units. Supply routes were severed, and entire regions were bypassed as Patton's armored columns cut deep into French territory. Elster commanded mainly occupation troops, garrison units, supply personnel, men trained to hold territory, not fight fast-moving mechanized warfare. Now, these men were trapped the Lire River at their backs, Patton's forces cutting off any hope of retreat to Germany, and Allied aircraft dominating the skies. Every day, Elster's men faced the risk of annihilation. Scouts reported American patrols advancing. The roar of engines and the shadow of bombers overhead kept the troops on edge. French resistance fighters moved silently through forests and villages, ready to strike at isolated detachments. Soldiers whispered rumors of brutal retribution if they surrendered, fearing execution or abuse. Morale was fragile and desperation grew with each passing hour. Elster's options were grim. First, they could attempt to fight east to German lines. This was militarily impossible. His men lacked the equipment and training for such an offensive. They would be destroyed by air attacks long before reaching safety. Second, they could scatter into the countryside and conduct guerrilla operations, but this would only prolong the suffering. Units would be hunted down individually, and their deaths would serve no strategic purpose. Third, they could surrender, a decision fraught with danger under Nazi law. Officers who surrendered without orders risked execution, and their families could be punished. Yet Elster was a soldier first. He understood that continuing to fight would only result in pointless slaughter. He reached out to American forces through intermediaries. His message was careful, measured, and rational. He commanded roughly 20,000 troops willing to surrender, but only under certain conditions. He demanded assurances that his men would be treated according to the Geneva Conventions, that military formalities would be respected, and that they would not be handed over to French forces who had every reason to seek revenge. This proposal reached Patton's headquarters. The room was tense as his staff considered the implications. Some officers argued that negotiating with a defeated enemy was a mistake. Why offer them terms? One officer said. We should accept an unconditional surrender. Make it clear there is no dignity in defeat. Another countered, if we humiliate them, they will fight to the death. American lives will be lost unnecessarily. Patton, leaning over the map of France, remained silent for a long moment. The room waited, tension thick in the air. Then he spoke. Strategy is not only about killing the enemy, It's about creating conditions where the enemy will act in a way that serves our objectives. If surrendering officers know they will be treated professionally, if they know capitulation is safe and honorable, they will choose life over pointless death. That's not mercy. That is strategy. His staff nodded, understanding the depth of his reasoning. Patton was not sentimental, nor was he weak. He was calculating, rational, and visionary. He saw that professional soldiers, given the option of honorable surrender, could be removed from the battlefield without a fight. The surrender would save lives, secure territory, and reduce the chaos of combat. Patton's decision would not only affect Steer's 20,000 men, it would send a message to German forces across France. Meanwhile, Steer and his officers faced mounting pressure. Soldiers whispered about surrender, worried about summary execution or abuse. Some officers demanded they fight, while others pleaded for the safety of their men. Steer remained resolute. He would surrender, but only under conditions that ensured the dignity and survival of his troops. As preparations were made, the tension mounted on both sides. German soldiers moved cautiously, eyes scanning forests and hills for enemy patrols. Dust rose from their boots as they formed columns for the surrender, the sun glinting off their helmets. Every step carried fear, uncertainty, and the weight of moral decision-making. For American soldiers, the approach of 20,000 men was unprecedented. Proper procedures had to be followed meticulously. One misstep could lead to chaos or tragedy. Patton's strategic calculation was clear. Treat these soldiers according to the law, and rational officers across France would take notice. Humiliate them, and the consequences would be deadly. His approach was a lesson in psychological warfare, strategy, and leadership. By creating a situation where surrender was safe, he transformed what could have been a bloody confrontation into a calculated strategic advantage. As the German forces approached American lines, tension reached its peak. Dust, smoke, and the low hum of aircraft created an atmosphere of uncertainty. Soldiers held their breath, knowing that one misstep could trigger violence. Yet through careful coordination, discipline, and adherence to military protocol, the surrender was set to take place. Steer and his staff advanced with a mixture of fear, resolve, and professionalism, knowing that the outcome of their actions could reverberate far beyond this moment, September 16, 1944. The morning air over western France was crisp, tinged with the scent of wet earth and the distant tang of smoke from past skirmishes. The Lier River shimmered in the early sunlight, a calm contrast to the storm of tension that had gripped thousands of men for weeks. On one side, nearly 20,000 German soldiers, weary, disciplined, and tense, marched toward the American lines. On the other, officers of Patton's Third Army waited, charts and maps spread across tables, radios crackling with last-minute updates, the weight of command heavy in their eyes. For Steer, the march was more than a movement of men. It was the culmination of weeks of impossible decisions. His troops, though disciplined, carried the fear of the unknown. Rumors of French partisans taking brutal revenge had haunted them. Some soldiers whispered of execution by American troops, stories distorted by months of fear and isolation. Every step toward the enemy lines was a gamble with life, honor, and reputation. Yet Steer remained calm, projecting authority and composure. He knew that the survival of his men depended on discipline and adherence to military protocol. Any disorder could turn the surrender into a massacre. Patton's officers, meanwhile, monitored the approach with precision. Radios relayed reports from the front lines. The German columns were steady, cohesive, and remarkably disciplined. This was no mob. This was an army choosing survival over futile heroics. Some officers leaned over the maps, murmuring anxiously. "Sir," one said, "we must ensure our troops do not provoke them. Any aggressive move could set them off." Another officer replied, "We cannot afford even a single incident. 20,000 prisoners in formation under the eyes of our men. This is as much a test of discipline for us as it is for them." Patton nodded. He understood that this surrender was as much psychological as it was logistical. How his men treated the Germans would echo far beyond this moment, shaping the choices of other German commanders still resisting across France. As the German troops approached, tension hung thick in the air. Dust rose from marching boots, glinting sunlight off helmets created flashes of silver in the morning light, and the low hum of Allied aircraft overhead reminded everyone that danger was never far away. Sturr's staff walked alongside him, their faces lined with exhaustion and worry. Yet their movements were precise, deliberate, reflecting the professional soldiers they were. Every unit had been organized, every column counted, every weapon accounted for. This was surrender executed with honor, and Sturr knew that how they conducted themselves could influence future outcomes for other German units. The first American officers to meet them held their positions with careful attention. Every word, gesture, and instruction followed established protocol. Sturr stepped forward, voice steady, announcing the formal capitulation of his command. The American officers responded with professionalism and calm authority. There was no mockery, no intimidation, no theatrics. This was military conduct in its purest form, a dance of procedure, precision, and respect. Every step of the surrender was watched, recorded, and processed. Soldiers were disarmed in an orderly manner, counted, and organized for transport to prisoner of war camps. Medical personnel attended to those who needed care, providing attention to injuries or exhaustion. Rations were distributed, and officers were separated from enlisted men according to regulations. The contrast with what the German soldiers had feared was stark. What they had imagined as punishment or humiliation turned into meticulous professional treatment. This was not charity, it was law, discipline, and strategy in action. Patton, observing from his command posts and reports, knew the broader implications of every decision. Treating surrendering enemies with respect was not weakness. It was calculated strategy. Every officer and soldier who witnessed this would report the experience back to units still resisting elsewhere. The word would spread. Surrender to American forces meant survival, adherence to protocol, and proper treatment. It was an incentive for rational decisions across the battlefield. In the following hours, American soldiers processed tens of thousands of German troops. Camps were prepared, transportation coordinated, medical checks conducted. Each step required precision, but also awareness. A single misstep, a misinterpreted order, an accidental shove, a frightened soldier reacting violently could have spiraled into chaos. Yet the operation went smoothly. Discipline on both sides prevented disaster, and every surrendering unit was absorbed into the system without incident. Sturr himself remained composed, coordinating with American officers, ensuring his troops followed orders. His own fear, doubt, and moral hesitation were tempered by experience and training. For him, this was a professional decision made under impossible circumstances. He was aware that Hitler's laws considered surrender an act of treason, punishable by death, and that families could be punished. Yet he also knew that fighting to the last man would have been meaningless slaughter. He chose rationality, morality, and survival for his men. Patton's decision to authorize the surrender terms and enforce proper treatment demonstrated a side of the general often overshadowed by tales of bold attacks and relentless offensives. Here, in the organized, orderly surrender of 20,000 men, Patton combined strategy with psychological insight, recognizing that human behavior could be as decisive as firepower. Officers and soldiers, rational and professional, when given a dignified path to surrender, would take it, and the results were immediate. Within days, German units across Western France began surrendering in increasing numbers. Some were small garrisons, others were battalion or regiment-sized formations. Each surrender was influenced by what they had heard about Sturr's capitulation and the treatment that followed. American intelligence officers noticed a clear pattern. Units that feared brutal punishment or execution fought to the death. Units that expected proper handling under international law often chose survival. Patton had effectively created a psychological advantage that reduced casualties, shortened campaigns, and preserved resources. The surrender also had profound human effects. Soldiers who had expected brutality were treated humanely. Exhausted, hungry, and fearful men received food, water, medical attention, and orderly transport. For many, this was a shock, a reminder that war, while cruel, could still follow rules. The ripple effect extended beyond the battlefield. Families of soldiers, officers like Steyr, and communities across Germany would eventually learn that not all confrontations had ended in unnecessary bloodshed. Steyr would spend the remainder of the war in American camps, cooperating fully with the authorities. After the war, he faced charges in Germany for surrendering without a fight, an act considered treason under Nazi law. Post-war courts, however, recognized the impossibility of his situation and the rationality of his decision. He had acted in the best interests of his men, preserving lives without compromising military honor. He was pardoned and lived quietly, always acknowledging that the professional, lawful treatment provided by Patton's forces had made his surrender possible. This surrender, executed with discipline, professionalism, and respect for the laws of war, removed 20,000 German soldiers from combat without a single shot fired. It preserved territory, minimized casualties, and demonstrated the strategic power of lawful, calculated military conduct. Patton's choice to enforce proper procedures created conditions where rational decisions became possible, turning what could have been a devastating confrontation into a strategic victory without bloodshed. As the day ended, the sun dipped low over the Leer River. Dust settled, soldiers marched silently into processing areas, and American forces reflected on the unprecedented scale of the operation. Patton's combination of strategic foresight, respect for professional soldiers, and calculated psychological insight had paid off. The surrender of Steyr's 20,000 men would echo across France, influencing countless commanders and changing the course of the campaign. If you've been captivated so far, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to WWII Silent Valor, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Next, in part 3, we'll explore the ripple effects of Steyr's surrender across France, the moral and strategic lessons, and how Patton's decision shaped the broader campaign, saving countless lives on both sides. The surrender of General Botho Henning Elster's 20,000 men was not just an isolated event. It became a turning point in the campaign across Western France. Word traveled quickly among German units, carried through intercepted communications, whispered rumors, and reports from returning officers. Soldiers and commanders alike began to realize that surrendering to American forces no longer meant humiliation or execution. Instead, it offered a path to survival. The psychological effect of Steyr's decision and Patton's handling of it began to ripple through the German command. Across France, isolated garrisons, battalion-sized units, and even larger formations faced the same impossible choices Steyr had confronted. Their supply lines were cut, their positions overrun, and their hope of reinforcement vanished. For many commanders, the stories of Steyr's surrender provided a blueprint. If surrender could be executed with order, discipline, and assurance of humane treatment, the cost of capitulation could be minimal. The alternative, fighting to the death, meant certain destruction, loss of men, and the unnecessary prolonging of the war. Patton, far ahead of the German lines, understood the strategic significance of this psychological leverage. He had anticipated that how surrendering forces were treated would influence the behavior of others still resisting. Every German officer who saw Steyr's disciplined, orderly, and law-abiding capitulation would weigh the cost of pointless resistance against the promise of survival. And so it happened. Within weeks, more and more German units chose to surrender rather than fight to the last man. Entire regiments previously thought capable of holding strategic positions, were removed from combat without a single shot fired. Each surrender preserved American lives, conserved resources, and shortened the campaign. This was the often overlooked dimension of Patton's brilliance. Historians frequently highlight his aggressive tactics, rapid advances, and audacious maneuvers across France, but the Stur surrender shows a subtler form of military genius. Patton recognized that psychological and moral considerations could serve as tools as powerful as tanks and artillery. Respect for professional soldiers, adherence to international law, and strategic calculation combined to create an environment where rational decision-making by the enemy could be anticipated and leveraged. Stur's own role in this unfolding story remained just as critical. By choosing the rational, disciplined path of surrender, he set an example that would echo far beyond the Lier River. His men were disarmed, accounted for, and treated according to military regulations. Food and medical attention were provided, officers and enlisted men were separated, and transport to POW camps was organized efficiently. The German troops realized that surrender could be honorable, that their professional identity as soldiers could remain intact even in defeat. It was a lesson in discipline, morale, and survival, a lesson that would save countless lives in the months to follow. Even among American troops, the surrender created moments of tension. 20,000 enemy soldiers marching in formation required absolute discipline to prevent chaos. American officers had to coordinate every movement, maintain order, and ensure no misunderstanding triggered violence. Yet for those who participated in processing the prisoners, the experience reinforced the importance of professionalism. The humane treatment of surrendered forces was not only morally right, but strategically advantageous. As the weeks went on, the ripple effects were clear. Smaller German units, hearing of Stur's surrender and the treatment his men received, requested to surrender under similar terms. Battalion commanders and garrison officers across France began initiating negotiations, often citing Stur as their precedent. For American forces, this meant less fighting, fewer casualties, and faster advances. Territory was secured without battle, resources were conserved, and the momentum of the campaign was maintained. Stur, for his part, spent the remainder of the war in American POW camps, maintaining professionalism and discipline. He cooperated fully with the authorities, aware that any misconduct could compromise the orderly treatment of his men. After the war, Nazi Germany initially charged him with treason, arguing that surrender without fighting was a violation of military honor. Post-war courts, however, recognized the impossibility of his situation and the rationality of his decision. Fighting would have led to the death of thousands of men for no strategic gain. Surrender, executed with discipline, preserved lives and upheld the principles of military conduct. Stur was pardoned and lived quietly, always crediting the professionalism and lawful treatment provided by Patton's forces as the reason he could make such a rational choice. Patton's handling of the surrender also provides a broader lesson in leadership. True command is not merely about aggression or tactical genius, it is also about understanding human behavior, morale, and ethics. Patton recognized that by treating surrendering soldiers properly, he created a system where rational decisions aligned with strategic objectives. This wasn't weakness. It was calculated, sophisticated leadership at its highest level. By combining force with psychological insight, he removed 20,000 enemy troops from the battlefield, preserved territory, and influenced countless other German units to make similar choices. The strategic implications of this approach went beyond Western France. The principle that humane, law-abiding treatment of enemy forces encourages rational surrender is now a cornerstone of modern military doctrine. Geneva Conventions, laws of armed conflict, and POW protocols are not merely humanitarian, they are tools of strategy. Patton intuitively understood this decades before it became codified. By creating an environment where honorable surrender was possible, He reduced casualties, shortened campaigns, and demonstrated the enduring value of discipline, respect, and strategic foresight. For the soldiers who had faced the impossible choice at the Lier River, the consequences were life-changing. Instead of dying in futile battles, they were fed, cared for, and transported safely to POW camps. Many returned home to their families after the war, able to live with the knowledge that their survival was not a result of luck, but the outcome of disciplined, rational decision-making. For Steyr, it was a validation of professional judgment, courage, and the willingness to act in the best interests of his men under unimaginable pressure. In the larger context of the war, the surrender of Steyr's 20,000 men exemplifies the power of strategy beyond the battlefield. Aggression wins battles, but understanding human psychology, morality, and discipline wins campaigns. Patton's decision to enforce lawful, respectful treatment created a precedent that reshaped the behavior of German commanders and soldiers across France. Every surrender that followed reduced the need for costly engagements, saving lives on both sides and accelerating the Allied advance toward Germany. As the campaign in France continued, the story of Steyr's surrender spread among both Allied and German troops. It became an example of rational, disciplined action in the face of impossible odds. It also reminded soldiers, commanders, and historians alike that warfare is not only about bullets, tanks, and artillery. It is about decisions, strategy, psychology, and the careful balancing of human behavior with military objectives. Patton's genius lay not only in his audacity and speed, but also in his capacity to see beyond the immediate clash of arms to the larger patterns of behavior and consequence. This story, brought to you by WWII Silent Valor, is a powerful reminder that leadership is measured not only by victories in battle, but by the wisdom to know when to show restraint, when to allow rational choices, and when to enforce discipline in a way that maximizes strategic outcomes. Steyr's surrender, executed with precision and respect, saved thousands of lives, preserved military honor, and set a precedent for lawful treatment that influenced the course of the war across France. If you found this story compelling, make sure to comment below with your thoughts, share the video with friends, and discuss what you think about Patton's approach. Was it strategic brilliance or simply following the rules of war? Either way, it is a lesson in leadership, discipline, and the profound consequences of human decision-making under extreme pressure. The surrender at the Lier River is not just a footnote in history, it is a story of rational courage, strategic insight, and the understanding that sometimes the most effective weapon in war is respect for law, human life, and the calculated choices of those who face impossible odds. George Patton, often remembered for his aggression, displayed a deeper level of strategic sophistication. By enabling Steyr's surrender, he removed 20,000 enemy troops from combat without firing a single shot, secured territory efficiently, and set a precedent that saved lives and shaped the course of the campaign. This is the kind of untold story you'll find here on WWII Silent Valor, where we explore the decisions, strategy, and moral dilemmas that shaped the greatest conflict in human history.